Dr. Siobhan O'Sullivan does like knowing animals. Dr. Siobhan O'Sullivan does like knowing animals.
Hey you guys, welcome to Knowing Animals, the podcast where we talk to animal study scholars about a piece of their work. I'm Siobhan O'Sullivan and I do like knowing animals. Now this episode of Knowing Animals is brought to you by our friends at ASA. ASA is the Australasian Animal Studies Association. They're a membership group for animal studies scholars. Membership is just $50 and the membership subs helps fund the organisation, which does a lot of amazing things, including holding a conference every 2 years. I'm a member of ASA. I strongly encourage you to think about joining ASA, the Australasian Animal Studies Association. Well, this episode of Knowing Animals is coming to you from Mexico City, where I'm attending the Minding Animals conference. It's very, very early in the morning, but we're so enthusiastic about sharing knowledge with everyone that my guest and I, we've risen early and we're here to speak to you about animal issues. This episode, I'm joined by Oscar Horta. Oscar is a philosopher at the University of Santiago. Now, this is going to be mangled. Santiago de Compostela in Spain. And today we're going to discuss his journal article, The Problem of Evil in Nature, Evolutionary Bias of the Prevalence of Disvalue, which appeared in the journal Relations in 2015. Welcome to the podcast, Oscar.
Thank you very much.
So, Oscar, can you start by telling us what inspired this work?
Well, it's a long story, but I've always been concerned that we should try to question our, received ideas, so to speak. That's why it drove me to think about animals in general. And in the case of animals in nature, at some point I realized that I wasn't really doing this. I could see that there was a contrast between the views defended by anti-speciesist theory and in general animal ethics with regards to the work done in environmental ethics. So the work of some people such as Steve Sapontis was quite influential to me in this respect. But only after many years I realized that it might be that animals in nature need our help much more than we have thought about it before. So I read some papers about that, and I reached these conclusions that at first I didn't like at all, and I struggled against them really because I thought, no, this can't be, no way. And I was looking for further evidence to deny those consequences, but eventually I couldn't find them, so I had to think about that in that way.
Yeah. I really enjoyed your piece, and to me it is a really fascinating way of thinking about animal rights or animal protection, whatever kind of ethical framework you want to use, because to me, yes, we tend to think about the captive animals, the animals that we have under our control, as those that we should be undertaking this kind of moral thinking, but you make a very compelling case. So for the listeners who haven't read your article yet, hopefully they'll race out and read it, can you step us through your argument?
Okay. So basically the idea is this, that there is a prevalent view that many people, both from the general public and among scholars, share, which is that animals in nature are just doing fine, and we don't have to do anything about them, just to leave them alone. The problem is that when we start to do some research on this, we discover that animals in nature suffer for many different reasons. For instance, hostile weather conditions, disease, parasites, psychological stress also, physical injuries, attacks, and a bunch of other reasons. Furthermore, this is not something that happens just to some animals. In fact, the overwhelming majority of animals have lives that are extremely short and which contain lots of suffering. So to see this, we just need to look at what population dynamics shows. So there are some animals in nature that may have one child. I mean, biologists wouldn't put it this way, but we are concerned with animals. We don't see a difference between humans and animals in this respect. So they have a child and they take care of that child, and there are very reasonable chances that this animal will grow and become an adult animal, or if this doesn't happen, she or he will have a good life. Now, this not always is the case, but still, in these cases, we can think that even if some animals live very bad lives, most of them, or many of them at least, could live good lives. But the problem is that these animals are just a tiny minority in nature. The vast majority of them lay huge, very, very large amounts of eggs, maybe thousands of eggs. Fishes may lay millions of them. Cats may lay, 9 million sometimes. And of them, only on average, one per parent survives. Most of them die shortly after coming into existence, and the ways they live are often very painful. They starve to death. Some animals never eat, or they die for any other reason, in painful ways and without having the time to be able to enjoy. So this is a much more serious issue that we've thought before. Is there something we can do about it? Yes, there is. There are ways in which we can help them, and some of them have been carried out already. There are, for instance, vaccination programs. There are feeding programs as well. Maybe we can talk about this a bit more later, but the main point of the paper is that we should be concerned about this, and that we should try to learn more about how we can help all these animals that really need aid.
So your argument relies on what I think is a somewhat controversial view, which is that death is a harm to animals. Am I correct in understanding that you hold the view that death is a harm? And can you explain why you think death is a harm?
Sure. Well, first of all, I wouldn't say that the argument really relies on that assumption. The thing is that the main point is that animals have very, very short lives, and because of this, they contain more suffering than well-being, because they die so shortly that they can't really enjoy anything, and they have to endure the suffering of their death. But in addition to this, yes, I think that death is a harm, and that this adds some disvalue to what these animals have to suffer. So I would say this because I think that death is a harm by deprivation. This is a standard view in contemporary philosophy. And the main point there is if you have good things awaiting for you in your life, and you are deprived of your life, then you are deprived of those good things that you could enjoy. So all sentient beings, all beings who can have a positive well-being, are then harmed by death. Of course, the same argument implies that if the only thing that awaits for you in life is suffering, then death can be something good for you, right? But basically this is the main. Of course, the issue is more complicated. There are other arguments we could consider, but I think this is the basic case.
So one of the arguments that is run sometimes by people who keep animals in zoos and in exhibits and things like that is, we love the animals, we care for them. And I think perhaps to some extent, certainly a lot of antibiotics, for example, is fed to farm animals, and so they perhaps they're more disease-free than other animals. Is there anything in your argument that suggests that we are doing a service to animals when we take them out of nature and have them in highly artificial contexts?
Well, the thing is with animal exploitation is that, we do that for animals, but that's because we want to harm them in terrible ways. I don't think we need to go through this because I guess that people who are listening to this know already about this, right? So I don't think that's justified because of this. I think that a better metaphor, so to speak, would be that of animal sanctuaries. And in fact, many animal sanctuaries currently not only provide shelter for animals that have been liberated from exploitation, but also for some other animals that maybe were free living and they are orphans or they become extremely sick and they would die in nature and they are well taken care of. So I think it's a good thing to do this.
So that brings me then to the issue of what does your view imply for us in terms of our behaviour or our engagement with animals, and particularly animals in the natural world? What are we obliged to do if we agree with your position?
First of all, I think that this issue may be compelling to many people, but they may be at a loss because they may think, well, what can I do right now to help these animals? And to be sure, we can all see every now and then in the media stories of people helping actually helping animals, like for instance, I don't know, animals rescued from ponds or frozen lakes, or I don't know, like animals stranded in beaches, like marine mammals who are rescued and so on. And then there are other projects. So, for instance, there are some wild animal hospitals and, as I said before, shelters where they take care of wild animals who need it. And as I also said, there are also these other programs that are like more ambitious. So, for instance, vaccination is a good example of this. And this is something that has been carried out for the sake of human beings, but it's something that really helps animals. So, for instance, because we don't want the animals to pass certain diseases to us, we vaccinate them, and this can be done, for instance, by throwing the vaccine in the woods, in places where they will eat it, with some bait and everything. So projects of this kind have eradicated rabies from huge areas in North America and Northern Europe. Also, other diseases such as swine fever and tuberculosis have been, animals have been vaccinated against this. So there are different things that we could do. But maybe what is more important right now is to spread concern about this and to encourage research about this. So it's very important to see that we shouldn't just care about animals living in the present or in the near future. Animals living in the far future or the far future, and they should be taken into account as well. So we should try to act in ways that can help us to help them, even if not now, maybe in 10, 20, 100 years or even more. And it's important this with work in academia because, for instance, much work in biology doesn't consider animals at all, the interests of animals at all. So one important way to do this would be to try to push it there. So more work on animals in biology, on the well-being of animals in biology is carried out.
Wonderful. Well, Oscar, I ask everyone who comes on the podcast to answer 5 quick questions. Are you ready for your 5 quick questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you recall the first piece of pro-animal scholarship you ever read?
If it counts as one, I would say Singer's Animal Liberation. So this was, I think it was, I remember the year actually, it was 1994, and I was a vegan already. But I didn't know anything about speciesism or the arguments to respect animals. And when I read it, it was shocking. So I was, wow, this really is important. I knew it was important, but I didn't know it was this important. And actually, that was what drove me to study philosophy, because I wanted to, to help animals. And because this guy is a philosopher, maybe by being myself one, I can help them too. And, over the years, I may come to disagree with some points in the book, but still, it was influential to me in this way.
Wonderful. Can you recall the first piece of pro-animal scholarship you ever wrote?
That's harder because I started writing basically leaflets and stuff like that, and honestly, I don't remember the first one I wrote, and I don't think there is a sharp border, so to speak, between scholarship literature and advocacy literature. So I remember the first papers that I published in journals, but they aren't that good or interesting.
If you had to name one animal studies scholar who's had a big impact on you, who would it be?
Well, I mentioned Singer already, but I also mentioned Sapontis, especially concerning his view about animal ethics and environmental ethics, how, these views opposed in this way. Then there are other people who I think are underrated. So, for instance, I love this book by Evelyn Pluhar, Beyond Prejudice, and it's not really that well known, and I think it's an awesome book. Also, I like very much the work done by Paola Cavalieri. And again, it's not really considered such a huge piece of work. I don't know to what extent it has to do with this, the fact that Paola comes from Italy, not from an English-speaking world. Probably to some extent it does. Also the fact that they too are women might have something to do, and we know already that we are in a movement where women are the majority, and they are very poorly represented when it comes to having a voice, and I'm not a woman. So I'm partly guilty of this because I'm occupying a space and a woman can occupy. But I would say these people, and also I would mention another person who is Brian Tomasic, and he's not really an academic, but he does extremely high quality scholarship work, so to speak. I would recommend people to visit his site. It's called Essays on Reducing Suffering.
Fantastic. So, Oscar, what's the most important thing academics can do for animals?
This is a very good question. So it really depends on what field you are working in. So I think that right now, biologists, especially ecologists, but biologists in general, maybe also animal welfare scientists, they can play a very, very significant role in furthering the creation of this, it has been called welfare biology discipline, to study how is the well-being of animals, not only of the ones that have been exploited by humans, but also of the ones living in nature. Then when it comes to other disciplines, other fields, such as philosophy or others, first of all, we can, of course, educate new generations of researchers. But in addition to this, I think we should connect much more than we are doing our work to animal advocacy. So, I could talk about this, but you have more questions, so let's leave it there.
If you had the power to change one thing about the human-non-human animal relationship, what would it be?
This is a huge question, and I think that changing attitudes towards speciesism is key. So once you change that, you haven't done everything, but you have done a lot. Once you think, okay, we shouldn't be treating other sentient beings differently from how we are treating humans. And of course, it doesn't stop in animals, because we can consider, what about in the future artificial sentience and all that kind of stuff? Well, when you question speciesism, I think you may be questioning other similar prejudices that may appear in the future. So, I think I would say that,
Fantastic. So, Oscar, can you tell us what you're working on next?
Right. So I'm doing more work on wild animal suffering and helping wild animals. But, I've published already several pieces on this. And my next work is more concerned with this that I mentioned before, with trying to see how this new discipline could be created. In addition, I'm also concerned about this with caring about the far future, because the future will last for a very, very long time, and most people don't care about the far future. But it makes sense to think that there will be sentient beings for maybe millennia, maybe millions of years, and there will be lots of them, way more than the ones that will exist in the next century. And we haven't thought properly about this. So, this is something I want to work on too.
Fascinating. So, Oscar, how can people find out more about your work? This is embarrassing because self-promotion.
Well, yeah, I have an academia page where they can look for me. Yeah, I'm on Facebook too. I'm around. Yeah.
If people want to find you, they will.
Yeah, I don't want to say, I have this and that, whatever.
Well, Oscar, thank you so much for joining us for Knowing Animals, and thank you to the listeners for joining us for Knowing Animals, the podcast where we talk to animal studies scholars about their work. Now, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at knowing_animals or on Facebook at Knowing Animals. And please, if you've enjoyed this episode, leave a review at iTunes. Reviews make it easier for others to find us. I'm Siobhan O'Sullivan, and I do like knowing animals.